Hello, welcome to Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor with Miles Hassell MD. This is an evidence-based podcast for people who want to use lifestyle choices to avoid preventable illness, as well as to treat illness. Listeners will learn the choices that work for better health outcomes for themselves, the ones that they love, and the patients they care for. We want to see patients liberated from the burden of chronic disease whenever possible. Hello, welcome back to Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor. I'm Miles Hassell MD, and this is our 10th episode of our podcast. We're going to be talking about some questions that we think are of general interest that people have written to us. And so hopefully this will be of value to you. And it's going to be dealing with areas that are controversial. So you may actually disagree with what we say, and we'd be glad to hear back. If you'd like to have us address issues in the future, or if you disagree with something we've said today, then you can send anything to info@greatmed.org, info@greatmed.org, or mail, if you believe in old-fashioned snail mail, to 4804 Northwest Bethany Boulevard, Suite I-2, number 273, Portland, Oregon, 97229. So now we're going to get to the first question. So Bonnie writes, just summarizing, I know that cane sugar is in some of the desserts you use, and we have a sweet tooth in our home and tend to make some kind of dessert several times a week, usually fruit-based. Is sugar in moderation okay? And it's a few times a week considered moderation. What are your suggestions for a sugar substitute for desserts other than the obvious, like maple sugar, honey, or applesauce? So this whole issue of sweeteners has a lot of complexity to it. In general, in reality, your best choices probably are fruit, honey, and maple syrup. Maybe some people would probably throw molasses in there as well. But if you wanted really a full exploration of this question, then if you went to our book, which is Good Food, Great Medicine, on pages 62 to 64, and also on page 97, which sort of talks about how to extract your sweet tooth, you may find a lot of useful, more technical information than I'm going to provide here. But in general, remember that your body is tuned to like sweets. Pretty much almost everybody has a sweet tooth in some form or another. And we know that sweets in excess cause problems, weight gain, all kinds of metabolic issues, hormonal changes, contributes to your diabetes risk along with other things. And so if we can get people to cut back on their refined carbohydrates, their refined sweets, which in our world actually, we blend it over and so that we include foods made with flour as well, because in your body, the flour products are handled about the same as sweets in terms of your glycemic response and so on. So we'd recommend you really keep all of your processed carbohydrates, that's sweets and flour products, to a minimum. And probably one dessert a week is probably enough for most of us, I would argue, unless you're very, very active and thin and have great blood sugar, in which case everybody's an exception. But in general, keep your sugars to a minimum. Use the sweeteners that your great-grandmother would recognize. That's honey, maple syrup, maybe some molasses, and keep the sugar to a minimum. That's not to say you shouldn't use it at all. Your body's incredibly resilient. And small amounts of sugar are handled just fine. Your body knows what to do with it. It's only when you start having it as a major part of your diet that you run into trouble. So a teaspoon of sugar in your coffee tends to feed your sweet tooth and might be a problem from that perspective. But the 16 calories of sugar in that coffee probably is not an important factor. And so what I'm trying to describe here is the difference between things you might do in order to train your body to like things to be better, compared to the absolute risk involved in any one dose of sugar, which is with any one dose, the risk is very, very small. It's the cumulative dose that appears to be a problem. A couple of things I'd like to point out is, avoid sort of fad sugars. So sugars in general are sugars. So whether it's coconut sugar or fructose or agave syrup, they're still dealing with sugars. And keep them all to a minimum. And if it's not a traditional sugar, watch out. Secondly, beware of glib and misleading terms like glycemic index. So many people will say, oh, I'm using such and such a sugar. such as agave syrup, because it has a low glycemic index. So does high fructose corn syrup. Glycemic index does not tell you anything about whether that food is healthy or not. And so don't use glycemic index as a measure of whether you're going to use a particular sweetener or not. If your sweetener has a high glycemic index, just use less of it. Thirdly, really watch out for what we call non-nutritive sweeteners. That's things that taste sweet but don't provide nutrition. Most of these are artificial. Some are natural. Stevia is an example. Monk fruit might be another one. These things, whether they're good for you or not, is uncertain. Their data for safety in the highly refined forms that people are purchasing is completely unknown. And they maintain your sweet tooth. You really don't want to maintain your sweet tooth. So generally speaking, keep your desserts to a minimum, maybe once a week. Keep your sweeteners to the traditional sweeteners of things like honey, maple syrup, maybe molasses. Don't worry about the occasional dose of real sugar, and watch out for glib sales pitches and fake foods. So Lisa writes about concerns about apples. So she comments that apples have been villainized in social media. I'm not familiar with that, but I'll take it. She says, I love eating apples and could honestly eat them all day. I put cinnamon on them, sometimes cloves, but she was concerned about the amount of sugar. For example, maybe as much as 19 grams of sugar in a medium-sized apple and maybe 95 calories. And should she be eating apples because of their sugar content? So this is an important question because we often hear people being told, don't eat apples, don't eat bananas, don't eat berries, whatever it is, because it has sugar. Sugar is the key component of your body's metabolism, or I should say a key component of your body's metabolism, glucose. And glucose gets converted to glucose from other sugars. And your body occasionally uses other sugars as well, but primarily the final sugar your body uses is primarily glucose. It runs on glucose. It makes glucose if you don't give it enough. So what you don't need to be afraid of is glucose in and of itself. What you probably should be afraid of is highly refined forms of glucose or other sugars, because that's what messes up your hormonal system, puts weight around your middle, damages your immune system, and so on. Does the 95 calories or 70 calories or 120 calories in an apple or a banana or whatever piece of fruit you want to look at, does that cause any problems? And the answer is no. And the reason is because of the total load of sugar when you eat apples. So if you eat a lot of apples, you become full and you stop eating apples. And that's because of the spatial considerations. So that's the first protective element that a whole food has for you. You simply can't eat that much. For example, if somebody gave me a 700 calorie muffin, which would be kind of good sized, maybe paired with a 1200 calorie hot chocolate, I could eat those 2000 calories in probably 5 or 10 minutes, and I might actually still have an appetite for more. If I ate probably 200 calories of apple, I'd be done. 300 calories, and I'd definitely be done. So in other words, whole foods are protective because of their spatial considerations, which is primarily driven by the other compounds in the food, apart from sugar, and by the fiber component in particular. So remember, apples are not just supplying those 70 or 100 calories. They're supplying fiber, a huge breadth of nutrients that are designed to handle that amount of sugar. And they're self-limiting in their consumption. So, for example, let's say I see somebody who's overweight. Maybe they have diabetes and they need to lose weight in order to reverse their diabetes. If they eat 2 apples before every meal, I can guarantee they're going to lose a couple of pounds a week, maybe 4 pounds a week. They're going to eat less and their blood sugars are going to be better despite those calories from the apple. So, eat as much whole fruit as you want. If you want to blunt the glycemic response in your body, you can eat it with a little bit of fat, such as maybe a couple of raw nuts. But we have yet to see somebody gain weight or become diabetic because they ate too many apples or too many bananas. In fact, we've often helped people become ex-diabetic by having them have 1 or 2 pieces of fruit before every meal and snack, because that reduces their total calorie consumption. It's a little thought experiment. Say to yourself, have you ever heard of anybody say, you know what, ever since apples came into season or pears are ripe, or the peaches are great. I've gained 5 pounds. Doesn't happen. So don't forget, sugar is something that our populations have been eating for the entire recorded history of humankind. We're designed to handle them. Our God-given body knows what to do with them, and they keep you from eating foods that are bad for you. And they provide a tremendous amount of nutrients in and of themselves. Now I'm going to address the issue of fruit juice, which is a whole different story. Fruit juice is a highly refined product in practical terms. They've taken away the fiber, they've taken away most of the other nutrients, and what do you get? You get the sugars in a rapidly metabolizable form, and in a quantity that's far greater that you can get by eating apples. So, for example, you can have 300 or 400 calories in the form of fruit juice and barely notice you've had anything. Where if you had 4 apples during that same period of time, you'd be full as a boot. So, when we're talking about whole fruit, we're talking about whole fruit. Fruit juice, I would argue, is a fraud. It's a way of thinking that you're having a natural product when in actual fact you're having a sweet drink. Don't have sweet drinks, except on special occasions like your birthday. The next question that we came across was sent in by Anonymous, and comments on, we are using our new homemade ice cream maker so often and wanted a healthy alternative with protein. We've seen a lot of recipes using clean protein powders and collagen, and does that make this ice cream healthier or healthy? And so let me see if I can unpack this question in a way that's useful for people, because we love making our own ice cream as well. So this is a subject that's near and dear to our hearts. So the advantage of making your own ice cream at home is one, you can cut the sugars by half, and I can almost guarantee nobody will notice. So you can make a lower sugar product. It's a much cheaper product. And if you restrict your ice cream eating to ice cream that you make, you're actually going to eat a lot less ice cream because it's a bit of work. Nevertheless, it's not as much work as it used to be because the new machines are pretty nifty. And that brings to mind a Michael Pollan comment where he said, you can eat as much French fries as you want as long as you make them yourself. In other words, junk food made at home, not only is it healthier than junk food out, but it's so much work, you just don't do it very often. It's self-limiting, so it's fine. So homemade ice cream, you get credit for doing it. Secondly, ice cream is kind of a treat. Don't try to make it healthy, in my opinion. It's ice cream made at home is actually a reason with as little sugar as you can enjoy is a fairly healthy product to start with. Milk, cream, some sugar, some fruit, vanilla, whatever you're putting in there. But to try to turn this into a protein supplement, I think is a mistake. You're trying to do too many things at once. And when you start looking at these highly refined protein powders, these are not whole foods by any description. These are chemical constructs made in big plants using high-powered chemical reduction techniques. And so we don't see any basis for thinking of them as healthy. We would put them in the ultra-processed food category and say that they should be avoided. Some of them, I think, require special attention. One of them is collagen. Collagen is really expensive gelatin. If you want to add gelatin to something, just get Knox gelatin and use it. What I don't know, it's horse hooves or horse hair or something like whatever they get collagen from. Just use plain old gelatin if you want collagen. That's what collagen basically is. Don't go for the highly refined chemical constructs that are overpriced, and don't make your ice cream something it's not. Ice cream is something to be enjoyed. It's not your protein supplement. The next question is from Jessica, and she listens to podcasts to try to understand what is happening at the cellular level. And she goes on to say, I understand that you're going to Mediterranean diet, given that you feel that that's most studied. But when I look into the macros, there's the gross components of the diet, it seems to be pretty carb heavy. True enough. And if you're trying to keep your insulin levels down, then heavy carb diet doesn't make sense. And so I question the medical community in suggesting that we should be going in that direction. And are we doing an adequate job of simultaneously vetting other diets as well? So that's a great just a beautifully expressed question. And it gets to some of the key components of what all of us should be thinking about when we're choosing how to stay healthy. So, once again, I'm referring back to our good book, Good Food, Great Medicine. And we have a section on critical thinking, looking at how to analyze medical data on pages 12 to 14. We have an exploration of the Mediterranean diet data, sort of showing how from observational studies and randomized controlled trials, the Mediterranean diet so far is the best thing going. That doesn't mean it'll always be the best thing going. We may discover something nuanced in the future that will be even better. But for now, the best data we have for improving health outcomes is the Mediterranean diet, and that's on pages 15 to 31 of our Good Food, Great Medicine, 4th edition. And then immediately after that, in pages 32 to 34, we talk about other diets and sort of how we look at keto and paleo and vegan and vegetarian and other restrictive diets. So that if you want more detail than we're going to be able to go into in this podcast, then that's the place to go in our book, Good Food, Great Medicine. But to go back to her question about being carb heavy, when you are looking at a diet, you have to look not at what's happening at the cellular level, because frankly, we're not good enough to know what's happening at the cellular level. We know little bits of it. We see through a glass darkly. We can see tiny components of what's happening at the cellular level, but the cell is incredibly complex. Your digestive system, your hormonal system, your muscle system, all of these different areas are so complex that we only have a dim understanding of what's going on. So if somebody says, hey, I know what's going to happen if you take a chromium supplement, well, I know what's going to happen at the cellular level, I would argue they're making it up, because we don't. So when you're looking at a diet, the first question to ask is, do people do better or worse on this diet? And then what do I mean by better? And you should mean things like hard endpoints, such as reductions in heart attacks and strokes and cancer and depression, and especially loss of life. So a diet that is supposedly good, but you can't show any data that shows that it reduces total mortality or cancer or heart disease or depression or whatever, then then you should question whether that's really a great diet. And so the Mediterranean diet has that data. Now, if you try to pick apart the Mediterranean diet and say, oh, it's got too much of this or too little of that, then you've got a bigger argument on your hands, because when we look at diet outcome studies and look at the diets that have had substantial benefit and those have not, and tried to see which part of the diet contributed to benefit, for the most part, we can't figure it out. A great example that was looked at really carefully was the Lyon Heart Study, where they randomized people to the Mediterranean diet or a healthy Western diet for 4 years, and these are people who had had a heart attack within the previous 6 months of being enrolled in the study. On the Mediterranean diet arm, they had a 70% reduction in heart disease, about roughly a 50% reduction in deaths, and about a 60% reduction in cancers. Pretty important endpoints, I think you'd agree. What we can't say is why. Did they have a change in their cholesterol? Nothing much. Change in blood pressure drugs? Nah, nothing much. Change in weight? Nothing much. There's something about diets that have an effect on your physiology that is beyond our understanding currently. And so I'd suggest great caution in interpreting a diet based on biochemical theory. Instead, look at hard endpoints. And currently, nothing else meets the hard endpoints that the Mediterranean diet does. So we would argue that a whole food, omnivorous, meaning including all the foods that humans have traditionally eaten, diet eaten not to excess, so you're not overweight, combined with some exercise and small amounts of alcohol and not smoking, that group of habits has more impact on your health than anything else that we can do, humanly speaking. Now, within the Mediterranean diet, you may well want to adopt different habits depending on your own personal physiology. So, for example, a common problem that we run into with our patients with type 2 diabetes is they weigh too much and they're getting too many rapidly metabolized carbs. So for them, we're going to really reduce anything that's sweet in their diet, except for treats on special occasions, and reduce any foods made with flour, because the flour is so rapidly metabolized. Now, obviously, the Mediterranean diet traditionally has included some pasta and bread. They've also included a whole lot of physical activity that allows you to tolerate a lot more of that. So, with Mediterranean diets, you can have a diet that's 60% carbohydrates or 40% carbohydrates, for example. There's a tremendous amount of variation. So nothing I say previously should take away from the fact that whatever diet you choose, it should be modified to your current your personal health situation, and that may well mean that you reduce the rapidly metabolized carbs in the diet, whereas somebody else, let's say that, well, I have a nephew who's a Navy SEAL, and those guys are burning 6,000 calories a day, maybe more, um, when they're in training. And so somebody like that could eat plenty of whole grain bread and not suffer at all from it. His body probably needs it. And so keep that in mind, that your dietary choices are going to some extent reflect your personal physiology. One of the interesting aspects that we see in people on paleo diets and keto diets is they're kind of hard to follow. A lot of people don't find them easy to follow because they're too restrictive. And what they do is they start including more and more other whole foods, and they end up often being on a diet that looks to us like a Mediterranean style diet. They still call it paleo, they still call it keto. In actual fact, they're not. Um, but we don't really care if you're aiming for a whole food omnivorous style diet with most of your foods made at home. You're probably going to do pretty well. The next question is from Lisa, and it's regarding the question of toxic phthalates in olive oil. So, for those of you who need to know, it's the phthalates is spelled Phthalate. And so her concern is based on a large paper that was analysis of commercially available olive oils, and it said all of the olive oils had phthalates in them, some more, some less. And phthalates are hormone disrupting compounds in our environment, and we should avoid them. The problem with these kinds of papers is that every single food out there has something that could be considered, by some people's standards, as a toxin. I can show you that cabbage causes cancer, when in actual fact it doesn't. But if you just looked at the micronutrient compound, or I should say, the chemical composition of cabbage, we can demonstrate potential carcinogenic effects of cabbage. Cabbage doesn't cause cancer, however. So the point I'm making is, when you dive too deep into chemistry that we are not capable of understanding at the present time, we're going to get confused. And so, to start with, when you're looking at biochemistry, be humble. Realize how little we know about our body metabolism, and how little we know about what the body is capable of in terms of detoxification. So, when you think of your body, remember it takes in all those nutrients and makes things. It makes hair and nails and hormones and muscle and so on. It gives you energy so you can do things. It creates a brain that can think. So all these things are the things it does that are positive. It also breaks down stuff. It takes toxins. So your body is making toxins every moment. Inside every cell is a little production method for hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is really toxic. That's why your body makes it, to kill stuff. So, but it knows what to do with it. If you ingest a toxin from outside, say cyanide. So there's a lot of cyanide in your food supply. So I munch on an apple seed, I get a bunch of cyanide in my stomach, your body deals with it. So your body has not just a huge production potential built within it, it also has a huge detoxification mechanism built within it. And so if you look at this toxic environment that you might see yourself as living in, within that toxic environment, humans are living longer and better, meaning higher quality lives at later ages, than humans ever have in recorded history. And that should be really encouraging to you. So to go back to phthalates and olive oil, we can say, you know what? People who eat olive oil do better. That's the subject of one of our past podcasts. They do better. So phthalates or no phthalates, olive oil produces, within the human metabolism, better health outcomes. Your body knows how to handle the phthalates up to a point. And so unless somebody can show you that the amount of phthalates in the olive oil you're getting, considering how much olive oil you use per day, that amount of phthalates causes real problems in real human beings, I think you can ignore it and go on and use your olive oil because you know that people who use olive oil are healthier. So if you're afraid of a compound such as phthalates, first of all, ask yourself, is the quantity I'm getting sufficient to cause a problem? And unless you can answer that question, maybe it's something you don't need to be afraid of. And anybody who purports to be an expert about phthalates or whatever should be able to answer that question for you, or they shouldn't be bringing up the subject. Secondly, when it's a compound that is relatively ubiquitous in the environment, you're going to be exposed to it. Then ask yourself, how do I create a body that's really good at detoxification? And the way you create a body that's really good at detoxification is don't have excess weight around the waist, get exercise several times a day, even if it's very brief, eat a whole food diet that you mostly make at home, have small amounts of alcohol, don't smoke. Have a diet that's heavy in fruits and vegetables, with still having protein, probably with every meal and snack. Healthy fats, which includes pretty much all of traditional foods: fish, red meat, eggs, dairy, fruits and vegetables, beans and grains, olive oil. And say to yourself, if my God-given body is given all these compounds in terms of food, then it's probably going to be pretty good at breaking down any toxins it comes across. And we have 100 years of data in terms of human longevity that suggests that is the case. So be careful about being afraid of minor potential toxins. Instead, be much more afraid of major potential toxins, such as a waistline that's too large, or activity level that's not enough, or eating too much processed food. So thanks for listening. This was episode 10, where we read your mail. We'll be doing more of these in the future. Keep the questions coming. You can send questions by email to info@greatmed.org. You can mail us at 4804 Northwest Bethany Boulevard, Suite I-2, number 273 in Portland, Oregon, 97229. You can text us questions at 503-773-0770. And hopefully you'll listen in on future podcasts. Thanks very much.